The call came in at 5:12 on a Tuesday, 3 minutes before I was supposed to walk into the quarterly pipeline review. My office phone lit up with Lauren Pike from HR, which was already a bad sign. Lauren never called. Lauren sent calendar invites with words like alignment and discussion. Calls meant somebody wanted a motion before paperwork. When I stepped into Cedar Room on the 12th floor, the air felt aggressively cold. Somebody had turned the thermostat down the way executives do when they want a room to feel efficient. My leather portfolio was still warm for my hand. The screen at the front showed my own slide deck. Q3 renewals. Enterprise forecast. A list of accounts I had spent 12 years building. And sitting at the head of the table, in a navy suit that looked expensive and somehow still fit him wrong, was Grant Mercer, 32, CEO's son. Newly appointed Executive Vice President of Revenue Transformation, which is not a real job so much as a warning sign. He didn't ask me to sit down. He smiled the way people do when they've practiced being decisive in a mirror and said, "Vivian, we're moving in a different direction. Your role is being eliminated effective immediately." I looked at the deck behind him. My deck. My accounts. My revenue. Then he added, in front of 9 people who suddenly found the conference table fascinating, and, per your contract, legal will be enforcing your non-compete. So, I'd avoid getting creative. I set my portfolio on the table, nodded once, and said, "Understood." Then I took my badge off and handed it to him. I'm Vivian Hale, 46 years old, Senior Director of Strategic Sales at Norvale Industrial Systems, or at least I was for 12 years, 2 months, and 6 days. We sold compliance tracking and field service logistics software to regional manufacturers, medical distributors, and utility contractors across the Midwest and Southeast. Not glamorous. Very profitable. The kind of business nobody brags about at a cocktail party, and everybody depends on when penalties start hitting 7 figures. When I joined Norvale, we were doing $18.4 million in annual revenue and losing renewals because nobody in leadership could explain our own pricing model without a whiteboard and a headache. By the time Grant decided I was obsolete, the strategic accounts division I built was responsible for $41.7 million in recurring annual revenue. My team's renewal rate was 94.2%. Average contract value was up 37% over 4 years. Churn in my segment was under 3%. I landed the Tri-Corr Logistics Group deal worth $6.8 million over 5 years after their previous vendor botched 3 audits in 1 quarter. I rebuilt the national distributor channel after COVID disruptions and recovered $4.3 million in at-risk contracts in 11 months. I designed the account escalation protocol we called Blue Line, which flagged service failures before clients saw them and cut emergency discounting by 61%. I also pushed through Mercury mapping, a territory model that stopped 3 different reps from accidentally fighting over the same accounts like raccoons in a parking lot. Simple system. Clear ownership. Fewer mistakes. More money. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I didn't post thought leadership threads about synergy at 6 o'clock in the morning. I knew which client's procurement head hated being called before 8:30. I knew which operations VP needed numbers in a 1-page grid because he never read past the second paragraph. I knew that one of our largest customers, Hollen Beck Utilities, would tolerate a late implementation report, but not a sloppy one. There's a difference between sales and relationship management. Most executives only learn that after they've destroyed both. I missed my younger sister's 40th birthday because a client in Des Moines had a contract redline issue that would have delayed a $2.1 million renewal. I took pipeline calls from a hospital parking garage while my father was in for cardiac testing because quarter end apparently waits for no one. I had done all the things competent women in corporate America do for years before they finally realize loyalty is often just inefficient risk exposure dressed up as virtue. Still, I stayed, partly because I liked the work, partly because my team was good, and partly because Norvale had become one of those companies built around invisible infrastructure. If you're the person holding that infrastructure together, people start confusing dependence with respect. I let them do that longer than I should have. Then Charles Mercer, our founder and CEO, decided to bring in a son. Grant Mercer arrived on a Monday in February with a title nobody understood and a photographer following him through the office for internal branding shots, which tells you most of what you need to know. He walked into the sales floor wearing a watch that probably cost more than my first car and introduced himself by saying, "I'm here to drag this revenue org into the future." Nobody said anything. Maya Rios, my regional VP for the Southeast, looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup and muttered, "That sounds expensive." Grant had spent, according to the company-wide announcement, several years in growth-focused advisory roles. This turned out to mean 14 months at a venture-backed app company that sold meal subscriptions to college students and folded before its second winter. But Charles said his son had fresh eyes, which apparently outweighed experience, context, and literacy. The first sign of trouble came in his second week during a leadership sync in Birch Room. I was reviewing renewal timing for our top 20 accounts when Grant interrupted me mid-sentence. "We need to stop babysitting legacy clients," he said, tapping my slide with one finger. "This whole retention obsession is defensive. We should be leaning into top-of-funnel acceleration and outbound virality." There was a silence after that sentence that deserved compensation. I said, "These are contracted industrial clients, Grant. They don't purchase software because it went viral." He gave me the patient smile men like him reserve for women who know what they're talking about. "That's the old model, Vivian. We need more disruption in the enterprise motion." Maya looked down at her notebook, so he wouldn't see her smile. Derek Lynn from finance cleared his throat and said, "Just to be clear, these top 10 legacy clients represent 38% of annual recurring revenue." Grant waved a hand. "Right, but concentration risk is exactly why we need to de-risk with aggressive acquisition." That sounded impressive until you noticed it meant nothing. 3 days later, he sent an email to the entire sales leadership team with the subject, "Revenue Modernization Sprint." Inside was a proposal to reassign 12 of my highest value accounts to newer reps with digital native energy. One of those reps had been with us for 9 months and still confused booked revenue with billings. Another once called a manufacturing execution system, the warehouse app thing, in front of a client. Grant copied Charles, of course. I replied with numbers. Quietly, politely. 12 accounts. $14.2 million in active annual revenue. Average tenure, 7.4 years. 4 in renewal windows. 2 with pending expansion clauses tied directly to existing relationship continuity. Translation: move these accounts for political reasons and we bleed money. Grant cornered me outside Aspen Room that afternoon. "You have to stop protecting your kingdom," he said. "My kingdom makes payroll," I said. He laughed like I'd made a joke for him. "See, that's exactly the issue. You think in terms of ownership. I think in terms of scale." "No," I said. "You think in slogans." He stared at me for half a second, surprised I'd said it out loud. Then he straightened his cuff and smiled. "I'm trying to help you evolve." That was Grant in one sentence. Deeply underqualified men always think resistance to their bad ideas is a growth problem in somebody else. He started showing up on client calls he wasn't invited to, usually late, always louder than necessary. On a video call with Tri-Corr, their COO, James Vetter, asked a routine question about our phased pricing on multi-site rollout. Before I could answer, Grant leaned toward the camera and said, "We're moving away from legacy discount architecture into a more dynamic monetization ecosystem." James blinked once. "What does that mean for my invoice?" Grant actually said, "It means we're reimagining the value conversation." I stepped in before James ended the call. "It means your existing pricing stays in place through Q4 and any expansion sites are billed at the same rate card we negotiated in January." James nodded. "That's what I was asking." After the call, Grant told me I had undercut him. I said, "You were free-falling in public." He filed that one away. The mistakes got worse. He approved a prospecting campaign aimed at companies we'd already disqualified for poor payment history. He told marketing to reposition us as a frictionless SaaS disruptor, which was a bold choice for a company whose biggest customers needed audit logs, service guarantees, and people answering the phone. He confused gross margin with gross bookings in a board prep meeting and blamed the spreadsheet formatting. At one point he asked me, in front of 2 account managers and Derek from finance, Why our enterprise clients couldn't just self-serve into upsell velocity. Derek took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. I said, because they run regulated supply chains, not a streaming subscription. Grant smirked. That kind of thinking is exactly why old-school sales leaders get left behind. Old school. I was 46, not embalmed. My team noticed. Of course they did. Maya started closing my office door before saying anything about him, which was wise. One afternoon, she sat down across from me and said, he told Caleb to pitch Hollen Beck on premium analytics without mentioning the implementation fee. I looked up from my laptop. He did what? He said, fee transparency creates friction. Fee transparency prevents lawsuits. She laughed once, without humor. That was my thought too. Then there was Lauren Pike from HR. Lauren had spent 8 years mastering the expression of a woman who wishes to remain employed without participating in foolishness. She stopped by my office under the pretense of checking on headcount planning and said, very carefully, you might want to make sure you have personal copies of anything you're contractually entitled to retain. I looked at her for a second. That's a very specific sentence. She adjusted the folder in her hands. I've found specificity clarifies things. That night I went home, opened the contract file I kept in my personal records, and read my employment agreement again. Salary terms, incentive comp severance, confidentiality, non-solicitation, non-compete. The non-compete had bothered me the day I signed it 3 years earlier during an executive retention update. Not because I planned to leave. Because I had a habit of reading documents before attaching my name to them, a practice increasingly viewed in corporate life as hostile. So I'd paid a labor attorney in Illinois, Martin Keene, $1,200 to review it. Martin had called me the next day and said, did they really have you sign this while already employed and offer no new compensation beyond continued employment? Yes. He made a small sound that lawyers make when they smell opportunity. Then, under state law, this is very likely unenforceable as written. There are a few reasons, but the short version is consideration is weak, geographic scope is sloppy, and the role definitions are broad enough to be laughed at by a motivated judge. I asked him what that meant in practical terms. It means they can threaten. Threatening is cheap. Enforcing is harder. I had thanked him, filed his written memo in my personal records, and gone back to work because at the time I still thought preparation was something you did quietly and hopefully never needed. For 3 years, I kept that memo updated. When Illinois adjusted restrictions around non-competes, Martin sent me a 1-page note confirming what we already suspected. Norvale's clause had problems. Enough problems that any competent attorney on my side would enjoy the conversation. I never told anyone at work. Why would I? If a company wants the comfort of your restraint, it should at least draft the paperwork correctly. By April, Grant had turned his attention fully toward me. He began referring to my accounts as legacy concentration clusters, which sounded like a diagnosis. He excluded me from 2 strategy meetings involving renewals I had personally negotiated. Then he scheduled the quarterly pipeline review for Cedar Room and moved it from 5:30 to 5:15 without telling my assistant, which was petty enough to be on brand. I walked in at 5:12. Lauren from HR was already there. Charles Mercer was not, which told me everything. If the founder can't be bothered to fire the person who protected his company for 12 years, he has already made peace with cowardice. Grant stood at the head of the table with both hands on the polished wood, like he was posing for a magazine article about leadership. Lauren had a folder. Derek from finance was near the far end of the table, eyes fixed on the screen. Maya sat rigid, jaw set, not looking at me because if she did, she might say something honest. The vent above Cedar Room always rattled when the air kicked on. That day it sounded absurdly loud. Grant said, "Thanks for joining. I'll keep this efficient." I stayed standing. "I'm sure you will." His mouth tightened. Small victory. Lauren slid the folder toward me but kept her fingertips on it for a moment, like even the paperwork embarrassed her. Grant glanced around the room before speaking, making sure he had an audience. As part of our broader revenue modernization initiative, we've decided to eliminate the Senior Director of Strategic Sales role. Not replace. Eliminate. Corporate language is fascinating. They'll set your house on fire and call it a space optimization event. I asked, and my accounts? He said it immediately. He had rehearsed this part. They'll be redistributed across the new growth structure. Maya inhaled sharply. Derek shut his eyes for half a second. I looked at Grant. You mean handed to people who didn't build them? He smiled. I mean integrated into a more scalable model. Then he went for the extra humiliation because men raised inside power often think cruelty reads as authority. And before you ask, legal has reviewed your employment restrictions. Your non-compete will be enforced. So I wouldn't advise reaching out to anyone in the sector. There it was. The threat. Clean, polished, and public. Nobody spoke. I could hear the faint buzz of the display screen. Somewhere down the hall, a copier started up. Cedar Room smelled like stale coffee and lemon cleaner. Lauren finally said, softly, your severance details are in the packet. I opened the folder. 12 weeks. Release language. Reminder of confidentiality obligations. Reference to restrictive covenants. All very standard. All written by people who assume the person across from them is too stunned to read carefully. I looked up at Grant and said, understood. He seemed disappointed that I hadn't broken into useful emotion. Security can escort you if necessary, he added. I almost admired that. Not because it was clever, because it was so transparently insecure. I took off my badge, set it in his hand, and said, I know the way out. Then I picked up my portfolio, nodded once to Lauren, once to Maya, and walked out of Cedar Room without rushing. The sales floor was quieter than usual. A few people looked up, then immediately back to their monitors. Corporate silence has a texture to it. You can feel people calculating risk in real time. At my desk, I put my notebook in my bag, took the framed photo of my parents from the credenza, and unplugged the orchid lamp my assistant had given me at Christmas. Personal items only. I don't take what isn't mine. I also don't leave parts of myself behind for men like Grant Mercer to feel victorious over. Maya appeared at my door, eyes bright with rage. She was trying very hard to pass off as professionalism. Viv. It's fine, I said. It is absolutely not fine. No, I said, slipping the photo into my tote. But it is predictable. She looked over her shoulder to make sure nobody was near. He's making a catastrophic mistake. Yes. He thinks clients are logos. I know. Her voice dropped. What are you going to do? I zipped the bag closed. Go home. That wasn't the whole answer. But it was the only one she needed then. Because what they didn't know was that I had spent the last 3 years preparing for the possibility that one day somebody with a family connection and a title inflation problem would decide institutional memory was replaceable. Not by sabotaging anything. I never touched a file that wasn't mine to touch. Never deleted a note. Never hid a password. I left everything exactly where it belonged. But I understood my actual value better than they did. I knew which of our 14 largest clients had handshake expectations layered on top of written contracts. I knew which renewals were technically signed but operationally fragile because implementation goodwill mattered more than paper. I knew which procurement teams would use even a minor transition mistake to reopen pricing. I knew who trusted Norvale, and more importantly, why. Over the years, I built meticulous account continuity files for every major client I handled. Meeting histories, escalation sensitivities, board politics, purchasing cycles. Who wanted detail, who wanted brevity, who needed to feel consulted before legal got involved. Not gossip. Business intelligence. The kind earned over hundreds of calls and thousands of small corrections. I kept Norvale's official records clean and current because that was my job. But I also kept my own legal records at home. Signed comp plans, contract amendments, my original non-compete review memo from Martin Keene dated June 14th, 3 years earlier, and a follow-up analysis from the previous fall after state law changes. I had emails confirming that my so-called updated restrictions had been rolled into continued employment without fresh compensation. No raise tied to the clause. No bonus consideration. No new grant. Just a signature request attached to an HR note about alignment. I also had something more useful than paperwork. I had relationships. Not the fake corporate kind where people say, let's definitely stay in touch, and then disappear into a golf tournament. Real ones. The kind where a COO calls your direct line because he trusts your answer more than your company's brochure. The kind where a procurement chief asks if you can join 5 minutes early because the board is nervous and you know how to explain things without performing at them. 3 of my largest accounts had renewal checkpoints scheduled within 60 days. 2 had expansion decisions pending. 1, Tri-Corr, was considering consolidating an additional 7 field divisions onto our platform, which would take their annual spend from $3.4 million to just over $5 million. Another, Hollen Beck Utilities, had made it very clear they were staying because of continuity, not brand affection. Companies always think clients are loyal to logos. Clients are usually loyal to competence with a phone number. The funniest part was that Grant believed the non-compete was the trap. It wasn't. The trap was assuming I needed Norvale more than the market needed me. The morning after they fired me, I emailed Martin Keene and attached the severance documents. His response came back 19 minutes later. Do not sign anything yet. Call me. So I did. He answered on the second ring and said, let me guess. They referenced the non-compete with a lot of confidence. Publicly, I said. He laughed. That's always my favorite stage. Vivian, as of this morning, I'm even more comfortable than I was before. Based on your timeline, compensation structure, and their own drafting, I would challenge this all day. Meaning if you want to work in the same industry, I would not let their threatening tone make that decision for you. I walked to my kitchen window while he spoke. It was raining lightly. My coffee had gone cold on the counter. You sound cheerful, I said. I'm a labor attorney. Sloppy executive paperwork is one of the few remaining innocent pleasures. By Thursday, I had spoken with him twice more and declined the severance package. Cleanly, in writing. No drama. No speeches. Just, I will not be executing this agreement at this time. Please direct future correspondence to counsel. At 3:14 that afternoon, my personal cell rang with a number I recognized immediately. Grant Mercer. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 11 minutes later. Voicemail. Then came the message. Vivian, hey, it's Grant. Quick question. We're getting some unexpected friction on the Tri-Corr renewal path, and I think there may be some confusion around account transition architecture. Call me back when you can. Account transition architecture. I put the phone face down on the table and smiled. An hour later, Maya texted me from her personal number. Are you free to talk? I called her. She answered in a whisper. I'm in the parking garage. That sounds healthy. She laughed once, then stopped. It's bad. How bad? Tri-Corr froze the expansion discussion. James Vetter asked why 3 different people contacted him in one day with 3 different pricing explanations. I leaned against the counter. That was fast. That's not the bad part. There was a car door slamming somewhere near her. Maya lowered her voice further. Caleb promised Hollen Beck an implementation credit Grant never approved. Derek found out because finance got copied on the draft amendment. Now legal's involved, Grant's blaming everybody else, and Charles spent 20 minutes asking why clients suddenly sound uncertain. I said nothing. She exhaled. Viv, everything feels unstable since you left. I could hear how angry she was, but also how tired. He told the team this was just normal transformation turbulence, she added. Those were his exact words. Of course they were. She hesitated. Are you okay? Yes. Good. A pause. I'm not supposed to say this, but James asked if you were still in the market. That got my full attention. I kept my voice even. And, what did you say? That I had no idea. Good answer. I thought so. When we hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at the one message I'd been carefully not overthinking for the past 24 hours. It was from Elena Foster, Chief Commercial Officer at Axiom Cascade, Norvale's most serious competitor in the industrial compliance space. Subject line: confidential conversation. Elena and I had known each other for years in the polite, watchful way senior people in the same industry know each other. We'd lost deals to each other, won deals from each other, compared notes at conferences over coffee neither of us had time to finish. Her email was short. I heard you may be available. If that's true, I'd value a conversation. I had not answered immediately because, unlike Grant Mercer, I don't confuse impulse with strategy. That evening, at 6:42, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Grant. It was Charles Mercer. I let that one ring twice before picking up. Vivian, he said, too warmly. I think there may have been some miscommunication this week. I looked out at the rain starting again beyond my kitchen window. That was when I knew the real panic had started. And he hadn't even seen the numbers from Friday yet. I let that one ring twice before picking up. Vivian, he said, too warmly. I think there may have been some miscommunication this week. I watched rain drag itself down the kitchen window and said, that would be unusual. Grant seemed very clear. A pause. Not long. Just enough to tell me Charles was deciding whether dignity was still useful. Well, he said, sometimes transitions create unnecessary noise. There it was. Corporate language again. The verbal equivalent of spraying cologne on a house fire. I see. He lowered his voice. Tri-Corr has concerns. I'd like your help smoothing things over. My help, I repeated. Informally, he said. Just a call or two. As a professional courtesy. I almost admired the phrasing. Fire me publicly. Threaten me with an unenforceable non-compete. Then ask for free labor wrapped in the language of grace. That won't be possible, I said. Vivian, I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to act in the company's best interests. I smiled to myself. Men in his position always say company when they mean their own discomfort. I'm no longer with the company, Charles. Silence. Then a little sharper. Surely you understand there's a larger responsibility here. To whom? He didn't answer that. Instead he said, let me have Grant call you in the morning. No. Another pause. He was not accustomed to hearing that word delivered without apology. Vivian, if Norvale needs something from me, counsel can contact my counsel. Then I ended the call. By the end of the second week, what had started as Grant's vanity project had become a company-wide emergency. The first problem was relational. That one was almost immediate. Tri-Corr didn't just freeze their expansion. They formally suspended renewal talks until Norvale could provide consistent commercial leadership and pricing clarity. That was James Vetter being polite. What he meant was stop sending confused children into grown-up meetings. That account alone represented $3.4 million in annual revenue, with a pending expansion that would have pushed it above $5 million. Not theoretical money, active money, renewal window money. The kind finance counts before it arrives because everybody assumes competent adults are still driving the car. Then came the financial problem. Grant, in a burst of what I'm sure he considered strategic urgency, approved a set of bridge concessions across 4 accounts without routing the final terms through finance. He thought he was being agile. What he was actually doing was promising discounts that violated existing floor margin rules and conflicted with escalation clauses in 2 master service agreements. Derek called me from his personal phone on a Sunday afternoon, which told me the building was already on fire. I realize this is wildly inappropriate, he said by way of greeting. It's nice to hear from you too, Derek. He let out a breath that sounded like he hadn't slept in days. Do you know what happens when someone offers a custom pricing concession to a client with most favored customer language in their contract? Usually an accountant develops a stress condition. He actually laughed, briefly, then stopped. He gave one to Calder Medical Distribution. In writing. I straightened in my chair. Grant did. With his executive signature block and everything. If Calder pushes it, 2 other clients can demand the same rate structure. We're estimating a margin hit of $1.8 million annually if this spreads. There are mistakes, and then there are expensive demonstrations of illiteracy. Has Charles seen it? I asked. He has now. And Grant? Derek was quiet for a second. He said finance was being territorial. Of course he did. By Tuesday, the 3rd problem hit, and this one moved beyond sales. One of the discount amendments Caleb had sent to Hollen Beck referenced implementation credits that had never been approved, and because nobody in leadership understood the guardrails I'd built into Blue Line, Service operations started scheduling personnel against a deployment timeline that legal hadn't finalized. That meant labor was reserved, onboarding timelines were communicated, and a regulated utility client was given operational assumptions based on a commercial fiction. For a normal company, that would be embarrassing. For a company selling compliance tracking into utility environments, it was worse than embarrassing. It was reckless. Maya texted me at 9:08 that night. "You didn't hear this from me." Hollen Beck copied compliance. I stared at that message for a long moment. Compliance. Different department. Different kind of panic. Once the word shows up in writing, executives stop pretending this is just a culture adjustment. The next morning, I got the first truly desperate message from Grant. "Vivian, we have some downstream alignment issues tied to legacy process dependencies, and I need a quick brain dump on your old account framework. I'm trying to prevent some unnecessary overcorrection here." Legacy process dependencies. He was standing inside the crater calling it weather. I didn't answer. He sent another 1:36 minutes later. "Call me. This is becoming material." I still didn't answer. An hour after that, Maya called. She didn't bother with pleasantries. He just got humiliated in front of the board. That interested me. How? They had an emergency revenue review. Charles, Grant, Derek, legal operations. Grant tried to present a stabilization roadmap, and he put up a slide showing projected renewals as closed revenue. I closed my eyes for half a second. Projected, she repeated. Derek corrected him in the meeting, in front of everyone. Then legal asked why 2 active amendments reference terms that conflict with signed commercial policy, and Grant said. She stopped, maybe because even repeating it felt absurd. What did he say? He said, "The paperwork layer is downstream from strategic intent." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Not loudly. Just once. Maya said, "I know." What happened next? Charles asked if he understood what binding documents were. That one sat with me for a moment. Did Grant have an answer? Only if you count sweating. By Thursday, the board had been informed that Tri-Corr was exploring alternative vendors. Alternative vendors. In our industry, that phrase doesn't mean we're upset. It means your replacement is already in the building. Then the regulatory issue landed. Because Hollen Beck had copy compliance, and because a credit structure had been circulated without authorized operational review, Norvale had to file an internal incident summary for contractual misrepresentation risk. Not a government action. Not a fine. But the kind of internal compliance event that gets documented, time-stamped, and placed in front of senior leadership with language nobody enjoys reading. One bad executive can damage sales. One bad executive plus sloppy process can trigger audit trails. That was the moment this moved above Charles's preference for protecting his son. I know because he called me again that night, and this time his tone had changed. No warmth. No fog. No condescension. Just strain. "Vivian, I need to speak with you directly." "You are." He exhaled slowly. "What would it take for you to consult temporarily while we stabilize the client portfolio?" "Nothing temporary interests me. We're prepared to be flexible on compensation." There it was at last. Money. Executives always reach for money first because it allows them to pretend the problem is transactional. How flexible? I asked. A 6-month consulting arrangement. $400,000. Immediate. That was more than he had expected to offer, and less than he feared I might ask. I let the silence sit long enough to become uncomfortable. Then I said, "No." He seemed genuinely startled. "Vivian, that is a very serious number. It's a very serious mess." His voice hardened. "This company gave you 12 years. "No," I said. "I gave this company 12 years. Quiet. Then, carefully, name your price." I looked at the rain-dark street outside my window and thought about Cedar Room. The cold air. My badge in Grant's hand. The confidence in his voice when he said legal would be enforcing my non-compete. This isn't a price problem, Charles. What is it then? It's a judgment problem. That was the line that landed. Because he knew I was right. Friday morning, Elena Foster from Axiom Cascade and I had coffee at a hotel lounge 40 minutes outside the city. Neutral ground. No theatrics. No recruiters. No hidden agenda pretending not to be an agenda. Elena was good. That's why I'd always respected her. She stirred her coffee once and said, "I'll skip the flattery. We both know your reputation." That's efficient. We have an opening for SVP of Strategic Accounts. Base salary $550. Performance comp that puts total target north of $900. Equity after year 1. Full authority over enterprise transitions. And before you ask, yes, our counsel reviewed the facts around your restrictive covenant. We're comfortable. I looked at her. You moved quickly. She held my gaze. Competent people usually do. There is a particular kind of relief in speaking to someone who understands the difference between confidence and volume. I did not accept on the spot. I went home, read the documents, spoke with Martin, slept on it, then signed Monday morning. 3 days later, Norvale lost Tri-Corr, not the expansion, the account. All $5.1 million of it, including the pending division rollout, gone in one board-shaking decision after James Vetter informed them he had lost confidence in commercial continuity. He was kinder to me than he needed to be when he called. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. "I appreciate that. You held that relationship together." "I know." He was quiet for a second. "Are you somewhere better?" "Yes." "Good." Then he hung up, and with that, the biggest domino finally fell. That same afternoon, Charles called me 3 times. Grant called twice. Lauren sent a one-line email asking if I would consider a confidential executive discussion. Derek texted, "Board is involved now." Full panic. I was in onboarding at Axiom Cascade when the formal offer from Norvale arrived. Senior Vice President of Revenue Recovery. That was the title, which told me 2 things. First, they were desperate. Second, Grant hadn't named it. The salary offer was $620,000 base, plus guaranteed bonus, plus retention equity. It was objectively generous. It was also not enough. I called Charles back at 7:20 that evening. He answered immediately. "Vivian, Charles. We'd like you to come back." "I know. You'd have executive authority." "No." He went still. "No to what?" "No to the offer as written." "Vivian, be reasonable." "I am." He sounded exhausted now. "Frayed." "What exactly do you want?" I said, "A role worth returning for." Then I ended the call. They hit the breaking point 2 business days later. Hollen Beck notified Norvale that unless commercial leadership was corrected within 72 hours, they would suspend contract expansion and initiate a competitive review at the parent company level. That meant not just one account. It meant exposure across subsidiaries. Over $8.9 million in current and near-term revenue suddenly hanging over a cliff because a man in an ill-fitting Navy suit wanted to modernize a team he did not understand. Lauren called first. "Vivian," she said, voice tight, "Charles would like an in-person meeting. Today." "Who will be there?" "Charles." "Me." "Derek." A beat. "Grant." I considered declining, not because I lacked leverage, because I had enough to choose cleanly. But Norvale was still full of people who had done nothing wrong. Maya. Derek. The account managers now cleaning up promises they hadn't made. Operations staff being whiplashed by executive improvisation. There is a point where letting a lesson continue stops being elegant and becomes wasteful. So I said, 1 hour. Neutral location. We met in a private conference suite at the Langford Hotel at 4 o'clock. I arrived at 3:58. Grant was already there, pacing. He looked worse than I expected. Same expensive clothes. Less certainty inside them. Charles sat at the table with a legal pad untouched in front of him. Lauren had a folder. Derek gave me a small nod that contained an entire week of vindication. No one offered me coffee. Interesting what disappears when people no longer believe they're in control. Charles began. "Thank you for coming." I sat. Set my notebook on the table. "You have an hour." Grant opened his mouth first, which was a mistake. "We need to move past personalities," he said. "The business requires immediate continuity, and if you care about the clients you built, then..." I looked at him until he stopped talking. Then I said, "You fired me in front of my team and threatened me with a contract your lawyers should be embarrassed to mention. If you'd like my help now, I suggest you choose a different tone." His face went red so quickly, it was almost efficient. Charles cut in. "Grant." Grant leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "Good." We were finally using accurate seating arrangements. Charles folded his hands. "What are your terms?" I opened my notebook. Not because I needed it, because detail unsettles people who hoped for emotion. I return only as Chief Revenue Officer. Grant actually laughed once. "Absolutely not." I didn't look at him. "Then this meeting is over." Lauren shifted in her seat. Derek stared at the table. Charles said very carefully, "Continue." Base salary of $840,000. Guaranteed first-year total compensation of $1.6 million. Equity vesting immediately on control events. Full authority over strategic accounts, pricing approvals, renewals, and sales operations alignment. No executive interference in client assignments or commercial policy without my written approval. Grant snapped. "That's insane." I turned to him then. Losing Tri-Corr was insane. "I'm expensive." He looked like he wanted to say several things his father had probably warned him not to say in front of witnesses. I continued. "Maya Rios returns as VP of Enterprise Sales with a 15% salary increase and direct reporting line to me. Caleb is removed from any account authority until retrained. Derek gets final sign-off on pricing exceptions. All senior account managers who were forced into transition chaos receive retention bonuses." Charles rubbed a hand over his mouth. "That's a significant restructuring." "Yes." Lauren asked quietly, "And the final condition?" I looked at her. She already knew there was one. A formal internal report, written, preserved in board records, documenting the commercial, financial, and compliance failures that occurred after my termination, including who authorized them and which controls were bypassed. Grant sat forward. "No." I didn't even blink. "Then no deal." Charles said, "Vivian, that condition is punitive." "No," I said. "It's preventive." Grant's composure finally broke. "This is extortion," he said. "You're exploiting a temporary disruption because you think you're irreplaceable." I folded my hands. Calmly. "You replaced me. How is that going?" Nobody spoke. It was, to this day, one of the quietest rooms I've ever sat in. Grant looked at his father. Charles did not rescue him. Instead, Charles asked, "If we agree to all of it, when would you start?" "After signed documents are in hand. After Maya's offer is issued. After the reporting language is approved. And after I receive written confirmation that no restrictive covenant will be asserted against my future employment options if this arrangement ends." Lauren started writing immediately. Grant said, "You can't seriously be considering this." Charles turned to him with a kind of coldness I imagine Grant had not experienced often enough in childhood. "Enough." That one word changed the room. We spent 43 minutes on the details. Grant objected 3 more times, each one weaker than the last. He fought hardest against the report, which told me it mattered most. I never raised my voice. Never repeated myself more than necessary. At 4:51, Charles said, "We'll do it." I closed the notebook. "Then have counsel send the revisions." He looked at me. "Will you come back?" I stood. "When the paperwork is worthy of the question." I walked out of the Langford without hurry. 3 hours later, the documents arrived. By 9:15 the next morning, Martin had reviewed them. By 10:40, Maya had her offer. By noon, I had the formal acknowledgement regarding the non-compete. By 2 o'clock, I had my signed contract. At 8:30 Monday morning, I walked back into Norvale. Same lobby, same polished stone floors, same receptionist trying and failing not to look relieved. But power shifts have a physical feel to them. When I left, people looked down. When I returned, they straightened. Lauren met me near the elevators. "Good morning, Vivian." "Good morning, Lauren." She handed me a new badge. My name. New title. Chief Revenue Officer. The elevator doors opened. When I stepped onto 12, half the floor went quiet. Maya came out of her office first, smiling in the restrained way of someone trying not to cheer in a corporate hallway. Derek stood by finance with a coffee in one hand and what looked suspiciously like peace in his eyes. Two account managers near the bullpen actually exhaled when they saw me. "Morning," I said. Maya crossed her arms. "You kept us waiting. I like an entrance." That got a laugh. Small. Needed. Then I walked straight past Cedar Room. Grant was inside with Charles, visible through the glass wall. He looked up as I passed. I nodded once. Professional. Nothing more. He did not smile. Good. My first day back was not dramatic. That's one of the things movies get wrong. Real recovery starts with lists. I met with Maya for 90 minutes and reassigned every unstable account. I met with Derek and rewrote the pricing exception chain so no executive could bypass finance by calling recklessness innovation. I sat with operations and restored blue line oversight triggers. I called James Vetter at Tri-Corr, not to beg for business back, but to tell him plainly what had changed and who now had authority. He listened. He didn't return immediately. Fair enough. At 6:10, I was still in the office when Lauren stopped by my door. "The apology letters were issued," she said. I looked up. "To the team?" "Yes." "And the board report?" She held up a folder. "In progress. With names." I nodded once. "Good." She lingered a second. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you came back." "So am I," I said. 6 months later, Norvale was stronger than it had been in years. Not because I saved it alone. I didn't. That myth flatters everybody for the wrong reasons. Companies recover when competent people are finally allowed to do their jobs without vanity interfering. My title stayed. Chief Revenue Officer. Total compensation ended up slightly above target because once the structure was cleaned up, results had a way of returning quickly. We closed the year at $44.9 million in recurring revenue. Renewal rates climbed back to 95.1%. Pricing leakage dropped by 68% after Derek's approval framework went into effect. We rebuilt the strategic accounts organization around actual continuity instead of executive fashion trends. Maya thrived as VP of Enterprise Sales. She should have had that level years earlier. With the raise and authority she'd earned, she ran the Southeast and Central portfolio like someone finally allowed to remove ankle weights. Derek was promoted to Vice President of Revenue Finance, which suited him. He still spoke like a man apologizing for numbers while quietly saving everyone from them. Even Caleb improved after being removed from the line of fire and taught, slowly, that contracts are not inspirational mood boards. We also put real protections in place. No restrictive covenant could be added to executive agreements without outside review and board-level compensation consideration. All pricing exceptions required finance validation and written policy mapping. Client reassignment for top-tier accounts triggered a continuity review involving sales, operations, and legal. Simple controls. Unromantic. Effective. The internal report was completed exactly as promised. It documented the timeline for my termination through the Tri-Corr loss, the Hollen Beck escalation, the unauthorized discount exposure, and the compliance incident summary. It named decisions, named dates, named bypass controls. No melodrama, just facts arranged in the proper order, which is often more devastating than outrage. Grant was not fired. That would have been cleaner, maybe even more emotionally satisfying for some people. It also would have let him leave as a victim of politics instead of what he actually was. A man promoted too fast, protected too long, and finally forced to live inside the measurable limits of his own judgment. He kept a title. Smaller. Special projects. Eventually. No authority over pricing. No control over strategic accounts. No board-facing revenue presentations unless accompanied by someone who understood numbers and nouns. He stopped using words like virality in manufacturing meetings. Progress comes in many forms. Once, about 4 months after I returned, I passed him near the elevator bank. He said, without looking directly at me, "I underestimated how much institutional complexity you handled." It was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get from him. I said, "Yes." Then I got in the elevator. My life improved outside the office too, which mattered more than I expected. For the first time in years, I started protecting evenings that did not belong to emergencies. I had dinner with my sister on her birthday and left my phone in my bag the entire night. My father's follow-up cardiology appointment came, and without me taking a single call from a parking garage. Small things, maybe. Unless you've spent 12 years being indispensable to people who confuse access with ownership. And yes, eventually Tri-Corr came back. Not all at once. Trust doesn't work that way. But James agreed to a limited review first, then a reinstated service lane, then a revised multi-year agreement worth $4.6 million. Lower than before. Fairer than we deserved. I took it anyway because rebuilding isn't about revenge. It's about proving the right person was always doing the actual work. When I think about the total cost of Grant's little modernization campaign, the final number was just under $7.9 million in direct losses, recovery concessions, legal expense, delayed expansions, and remediation costs. That's an expensive lesson. Still cheaper than keeping the wrong person in charge long enough to do it again. Sometimes people ask me which part felt best. The title, the money. Watching Charles Mercer sit across from me and negotiate like a man finally reading the room he helped create. Honestly, it was Monday morning, the second time I walked into Cedar Room after everything. Same cold air, same rattling vent overhead, same polished table where Grant had looked at me and said my role was being eliminated effective immediately. Only this time, I was at the head of the table. Maya was on my right. Derek was across from me. The revised account recovery plan was on the screen. People were speaking plainly, taking notes, asking smart questions. Nobody was performing leadership. They were just doing it. I remember resting my hand on the table and thinking how strange it is that some people mistake quiet for weakness right up until quiet starts signing their approval chains. That week, after the meeting ended, I took my badge off for a second to clip it more securely to my jacket. Same gesture, different meaning. The first time I handed it to a man who thought he was ending my career. The second time I was just adjusting it before getting back to work. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, the people who call you replaceable are usually the ones who never understood what you were holding together.